So, all right, welcome everyone here tonight to this installment of the study of Ezekiel. We're going to be doing chapter 38 just tonight. I was trying to get in chapter 38 and 39, but then by the time I started writing and everything, and I said, no, this is not going to work. We're just going to do 38. Go ahead and get started with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right. Tonight, we're going to talk about a future invasion of Israel. And it's like I said, it's a future invasion, not something that has already taken place. And it's the prophecy of the battle of Gog of Magog. And a lot of times you hear it talked about Gog and Magog. Well, this one is Gog of Magog. And it's basically it's another retelling of many of the Antichrist prophecies that are found throughout the Bible. So, and as such, Ezekiel's Gog, G-O-G, and his hordes will be destroyed at the end of this current age when Yeshua returns just before the onset of the 1,000-year millennial reign. So the Gog and Magog of Revelation 20, if you were to go ahead and read in Revelation 20, that is a different event. Okay, that takes place at the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign, and it has very few similarities other than just the name Gog and Magog. Okay, and so it's a different event altogether. It takes place 1,000 years after the one that we're going to study tonight. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll read the first couple of verses. The word of Adonai came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, prophesy against him. Now, one of the most difficult prophecies in the Bible is Ezekiel chapter 38. And scholars for generations have speculated on the names that are mentioned in the chapter, and they've come up with an amazing variety of possibilities. There are several interpretation methods that I don't know if you've heard of Joel Richardson. He's a Middle Eastern scholar, but and commentator and so forth. So he came up with these names for these different interpretation methods, and the historical-grammatical method. That's the method of interpretation that simply seeks to understand the original context. Everything. Real estate is location, location, location. Well, if you're doing Bible studies, it's context, context, context. Okay, so you study this in the original context of any given passage, whatever it is, in accordance with how the earthly author, in this case Ezekiel, the earthly author of that passage and his immediate audience would have understood it. So what was Ezekiel saying, and then what was his audience hearing? That's the two things that you have to go through. This is thoroughly context driven. And it's, and like I said, it's called the historical-grammatical method of interpretation. And it's probably the more recognized and accepted approach to interpreting the Bible, at least among the trained conservative evangelical interpreters. Now, you got those that are outside of that. And so what we have there is called the Bloodline-Lineage-Migration Method. All right, now what in the world is that? This method begins with the ancient biblical name or people that we're talking about, and then it seeks to follow these people down through history to their modern day physical bloodline descendants. So we can also sometimes call this method the historical wild goose chase method. And it relies on extensive and often very complicated and even speculative efforts to track the nearly endless migrations of the world, intermarrying, mixing, and mingling various people groups all the way down through history. And so it relies on limited historical sources, and it's very faulty. It is the method of interpretation most widely used by the popular prophecy teachers. Many who are otherwise accepted, excellent teachers. That's just it's just amazing to me that they could use this method of Bible interpretation and following all of these. I guess it's the wow factor. But so this is the primary method behind efforts to connect the word, the name Magog or Rosh from Ezekiel's prophecy to the modern day nation of Russia. Now, then there's a third one there called the inconsistent interpretive methods. And this is, to me, this is a catch-all method of some prophecy teachers use. And it's basically, it just uses whatever method works to come up with the desired conclusion. And it's not contextually driven, and it's speculative, and it's as a research tool, it really is kind of useless. So anyway, I want to give you some examples. Now, in the historical-grammatical method, the names that we see here in Ezekiel, let me turn off this one. The names that we see here in Ezekiel, Magog, okay? In this historical-grammatical method, you'd have this. Magog is actually Turkey, part of Turkey. Meshach is also part of Turkey. Tubal is also part of Turkey. That's all in that Asia Minor area. And then you have Persia. Well, that's Iran. And Cush is now what we would call the Sudan. And then Put, or I guess that's how you said, Put is Libya. And then Gomer would be part of Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And then Togarma, and again, that's also part of Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And here's a map that kind of shows that, a very simple map, but that's why so many of these names, this right here is all Turkey up in here. And so that's why all those names just happened to appear, and we talked about them being Turkey. Here's Persia, which is Iran, and Put, which is Libya, and Cush, which is the Sudan. All right. So now let's look at this bloodline-lineage-migration method, and I can show you what a mishmash this is. All right. So, depending on who the scholar that puts it together, you've got Magog, okay? Well, with Magog, remember in the grammatical one, it was Turkey. Well, with this lineage where you're starting to track migrations across the last 2,000 years, well, Magog is Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Chechnya, Dagestan, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Finland, and it goes on and on and on. And even's got Scotland and others, so that's if you're trying to do this by tracking migrations and bloodlines, which just really doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, so then here's another one, If you do the Meshach, that's Russia, the Latvias, Lithuania, Romania, Ukraine, Moldavia, and Belarus, and and a lot of others up there in that part of Europe. So it goes on. Then if you got Tubal, that is Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England, and by extension the United States. And well, basically what we're talking about is the British Empire with these other ones here: Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Spain, Portugal, and so on, plugged into there. Well, that's another prophecy teacher's look at stuff. All right, then you got Gomer. Well, what Gomer was, that was part of Turkey in the our first example, but now this is all expanded. Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, and I got Scotland in there twice, don't I? And Ireland twice. Yeah, my cut and paste kind of got wild there, didn't it? So, but again, these are Northern Europe. And that fits very nicely with the British Israelism and all of that kind of stuff. All right, so going on, and I'm just one more slide here, one more screen. Cush is Sudan, Somalia. That gets down into the African areas, and Put is over on the Mediterranean, North Africa area, and then Persia. And there again, depending on who the guy that's putting this together is, there's a big difference between Iran, Spain, Portugal, Germany, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and so on and so forth. And then it even has Australia and South America, South Africa, and so it's just like wherever anybody happens to show up. So it's just kind of a strange way of doing it. And I'm not even going to go into the other one, that the one where they just use whatever it is they want to use to get to the conclusion that they want to show you. And that conclusion in a lot of cases is that Russia is going to come down and invade Israel. And so they say that because if you look back at the scripture that I read to you already, it talks about, in fact, let me pull back up there. It says, "Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog." And this thing right here, chief prince, that's the way that has been translated now. But if you look in earlier parts of King James, or let's see, the Revised Version and the modern, I think it's the modern King James or something, they have here the Prince of Rosh. And Rosh is a Hebrew word for meaning the head of. Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year, the first of the year. And it's used like 600 times throughout the Old Testament to mean the chief or the head, or the something that is not it's not a country, it's not a proper name, it's not a place name. It is talks about, it's a description of a person that that's the head of the group or something like that, or the head of the year in Rosh. All right, but a lot of times, and I read it just in the last couple of days, some guy gets on the, he writes and pontificates about how that Rosh, well, that's just Rosha, and so no, it's not. It's kind of like the same thing when somebody says that they're against Easter and even saying the word. I had a friend that he wouldn't even say Easter. He called it the E word because it was named after Ishtar. Well, and I've said it before, Ishtar was a deity in the near Middle East, ancient Middle East, and Easter comes from a Teutonic word for sunrise. And, the etymology of the two words is just as far as the East is from the West. But, that Ishtar, that's Easter. Well, anywhere else in almost every language in the world, even in Russia, the Easter begins with the word, the P sound, like Pesach and Pascuas and so on and so forth. So anyway, you got to be careful when you're trying to put modern English words and then try to link them to ancient Hebrew words and said that they're the same thing. It just, most of the time, you just can't do it. It doesn't work that well. All right. So, any comments or questions on that? And okay, I did want to show you this. Here is a map. If you were to use that bloodline method of tracing these names, well, here's the map that you would have. There's one of them anyway. And I found several others. It was just a real mishmash of stuff that, that they even, some of these things, it even had Ireland and Scotland were going to be invading Israel, along with the France and Portugal and so on and so forth. So, but everybody they'll say that, but they want to say, well, it's Russia. The Russians are going to come down and invade Israel, because that's more provocative than saying, yeah, the Irish or the Scots are going to be coming marching into Ireland or into Israel with their bagpipes and their kilts and so on and so forth. So it's just, and I've heard it all my life that it's going to be Russia that invades Israel. But if Russia invading the Ukraine is any example, they'd have their head handed to them on a platter when it comes to Israel. So, any comments or questions before we go on? I don't see any hands raised here. Okay. Verse 3, and say, thus says Adonai Elohim, behold, I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Now here, this has been properly translated, chief prince of Meshach, not chief of Rosh. And it says, I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws. I will bring you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly dressed, and a vast assembly with breastplate and shield, all of them wielding swords. Okay, so Ezekiel was to announce that the Lord, he was opposed to Gog, and the Lord would reverse the fortunes of war and actually take him captive and bring him and his vast, impressive army out of his homeland. And the idea of the imagery of putting hooks in their jaws, that was one of the things that ancient armies would do. They would take a hook and stick it, up through your chin and out your mouth or something, or, in the corner of your mouth, and, kind of a great big fishing hook in your mouth. And, that pretty well ensured your compliance with wherever it was your captor wanted you to go. All he had to do is yank on that chain a little bit, and he could pull you right along. And so, the Lord would be the first one to cause this action, but doubtless there'd be some secondary causes too. And never underestimate the influence of Satan and just plain old dumb human decisions. So, but that's this is a war that they get into, and at first they are very successful against Israel, because Israel will suffer terrible losses, and it will look like that Israel, and we'll see as we get later on in the chapters, Israel looks like that they are going to certainly be annihilated. But, you know, just at the last minute there, God comes in and changes things around. So, verse 5, with them will be Persia, Cush, and Put, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his troops, the house of Togarmah from the extreme north and all his troops, many peoples with you. Still talking to Gog here. So this is basically just a list of the allies of Gog, and so you can say Israel is going to be surrounded. You know, it's going to be a massive army coming up against Israel with massive resources. And so, I mean, part of this we can see today that Persia, of course, is Iran, and Iran is going to, you know, they keep talking about wanting to wipe Israel off the map and so forth. So, but you'll have Persia or Iran over to the northeast, and Ethiopia down to the southwest, and Put in the southeast, and basically all around Israel, they would be surrounded. So these folks would be allied somehow, united under this Gog, whoever this is going to be. And I think we could pretty much call him, if not the Antichrist, then a major Antichrist, if not the Antichrist. So, you know, just like Babylon sought to destroy Israel in the past, so this Gog guy is going to be a kind of a latter-day Nebuchadnezzar, and he will try to destroy Israel just like Nebuchadnezzar did. So, this was a large alliance of nations against Israel. And so, going ahead, be prepared. Prepare yourself, you and all your company gathered around you. Be a guard for them. After many days, you will be summoned. In the latter years, you will come against the land that has been brought back from the sword and regathered from many peoples on the mountains of Israel, which had been a continual waste. But they were brought out from the peoples when all of them are dwelling securely. You will come up. You will come like a storm. You will be a cloud covering the land, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. All right, so again, the Lord is still talking to Magog. He told Gog to be ready with all of his allies, because in these many years later, when this happens, that he was going to set things in motion for Gog to attack the Promised Land. When the Israelites are back in it, having been back in it for now, you know, several generations, and they had, you know, certainly since 1948. And then the Israelites would be living securely in their land, you know, during this time and enjoying peaceful conditions. Now, it said that Gog and his allies would descend on them like a storm. The part here where it's talking about living securely in the land, that has to be looked at, I believe, in the light of, okay, what is security? If you have ever, well, in Israel right now, okay, they don't have a shooting war going on like the 1973 war, the 67 war, or even the Intifada. I mean, they've got the harassment of everyday terrorist things that goes on, but it's not an all-out assault by any one nation. This, in many cases, what they're going through now is in some cases it's even worse, because you just never know who your enemy is, and so they could be at peace and secure, but still not. It's like if you were at home, asleep in your bedroom, and you are at peace, but at that very moment, there's a gang of robbers that are getting into your backyard and are just about to break down the door. And does that mean that you are secure? No, it just means that you might be at peace at that time because you're asleep. And so in many ways, when they're talking about Israel being in peaceful conditions, it's relatively speaking, I believe, and it will be also, I think, as a result of some major peace treaty that Israel will sign at the beginning, or at the beginning of the tribulation period. All right. So let's comments or questions. Let's go ahead. Thus says Adonai Elohim, it will come to pass in that day that things will come into your heart, and you will devise an evil plan. You will say, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. I will fall upon the quiet people who live securely, all of them living without walls, having no bars or gates, in order to seize spoil and carry off plunder, to turn your hand against the waste places now inhabited, and against the people gathered from the nations who have been acquiring livestock and property, who live in the center of the world. Okay, now, the question was, does this coincide with the time of Jacob's trouble? The way I look at it, time of Jacob's trouble is going to be the beginning era. It's going to be during this tribulation period. I think the Jacob's trouble is going to be more toward the middle of the tribulation, but certainly there's going to be a whole lot of stuff going on during the first part of the tribulation also. So Gog is going to devise an evil plan to go against the Israelites. He's got his spies out there, and they say, look, Israel they're sitting ducks. Their IDF is, now their IDF is filled with a bunch of teenagers that, they'd rather go partying and go to the beach than they would be at their outpost, because they don't think anybody's going to attack them. So they're ripe for the picking. And so he's going to try to invade Israel at this time. And, maybe they just feel like, well, we've got this peace treaty going and God's going to take care of us. That's okay. But so they've never really had this kind of peace before, and they're not enjoying it now. And so it's kind of hard to see, okay, what would the circumstances of that be? And it may very well be that they are lulled into a false sense of peace at this point. So and it's interesting there that talked about Israel being the center of the world. And that is, I've talked about it before, the prophecies that come about. You have to remember that it is centered on Israel. And the question was brought out, says, yeah, but what about Yeshua, Jesus? That should be the center of prophecy. Well, yes, it is, but how can you divorce Israel and Yeshua, God's chosen people and God's son? How can you separate those? You can't. They're all part of one. But my point is that this is all about Israel, and nowhere in there do we see, the United States of America or even Texas. None of those great nations are named or figure into it, unless you want to play the bloodline migrant game and try to somehow say that, okay, yeah, well, we're all descendants of this or that and the other. So, but Israel would be the center of the world in terms of what God is going to be doing at this point. Okay, so Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, with all its young lions, will say to you, have you come to seize spoil? Have you assembled your company to plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and property, to make off with immense spoils. You know, they're going to be inquiring because they're maybe wanting to get in on some of it. And so I think that is, you know, that's just kind of a natural thing for these different countries then to come in and say, hey, what kind of plans you got here? And Sheba was in Eastern Arabia, and Dedan was in the kind of like the middle of Arabia, and then Tarshish was southern Spain, or maybe Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, but basically in the Western Mediterranean was that. So that's where that would have been. All right. So going ahead. Therefore, son of man, prophesy, say to Gog, thus says Adonai Elohim, in that day when my people Israel dwells safely, will you not know? Will you come from your place out of the extreme north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great company and mighty army? Will you come up against my people Israel like a cloud covering the land? It will happen in the last days. I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I am sanctified through you, Gog, before their eyes. Okay, so God wanted, he wanted Ezekiel to tell Gog of Magog that on the day, when that day comes and when it's time, he's going to, you know, set things in motion, that Gog is going to go out and attack Israel, because he says, you're going to look at them and you're going to say, are they secure? Are they safe in their land? And do they think that no one is going to attack them? Then, you know, they're ripe for the pickings then, because we can go in and surprise them with the surprise attack. And, you know, even the greatest of nations are sometimes brought to their knees by a surprise attack. Look at the United States and Pearl Harbor. It was a devastating blow to our country, and yet, you know, with God's help, we got back and won the war. And so Israel is going to be looking like that. They're not going to be looking for someone to attack them. So Gog and his allies then would descend on Israel from the north. They call it the extreme north. Well, if you look at where Israel is, way up there on Turkey and the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, that area there, that's pretty much extreme north. That's a long way up there. And so that was kind of the extent of the known world at that time. And so they said that they would be coming down from the north. Okay, if you remember that's what Assyria did. They came down from the north. Why did they do that? Because they were following the Fertile Crescent, the Euphrates River, and they got up to the point of like at Haran or something like that. And then they headed right straight south, because then the geography allowed that for them to then bring their army swiftly into the northern parts of Israel. And then Babylon had already conquered Assyria then 100 years later, and then they made the same route. They used the same route, and they had Babylon had defeated the Egyptian pharaoh at Carchemish, and then brought then just came on down into Judah, and eventually defeated Jerusalem. They didn't come straight across from Babylon to Jerusalem, because that would have been quite a few days, if not weeks, of nothing but brutal desert, nothing to sustain them. But if they went up the other way, they always had water, and the geography was with them, and then they could come right straight down. So, and then when Gog does it, it's going to be the same kind of thing. You know, a lot of times wars are won on the supply train. How can they get their supplies in? And that's one of the things that brought down the German army, was that their supply chain relied on horses and horse-drawn wagons in many cases all throughout the Third Reich. Whereas Americans, we had trucks. And that's one reason that the Germans did not use poison gas, because it might have killed their horses, and then their supply train would have suffered from that. So that's off script. That's just a little bit of history for you. Okay, let's go ahead. Thus says Adonai Elohim, are you the one that I spoke about in former times through my servants, the prophets of Israel, who prophesied in those days for many years that I would bring you against them? So here the Lord is asking a rhetorical question to Gog. And he says, was it not you that was been spoken of all throughout the history of the Bible, and the prophets and servants and of the Lord had already talked about this earlier, where a nation was coming in from the north, and they were going to completely destroy. They were going to come in and attack Israel and devastate them. Well, he couldn't have been talking about Babylon, because they had already done that. And couldn't have been talking about the Greeks, because when they came in, Alexander the Great was so impressed with Judaism and the temple and all of that kind of stuff that he said, I'm not going to destroy these people, and they don't want to fight me anyway. And so he pretty much just said, okay, you're just going to have to pay me tribute, and other than that, I'll leave you alone. And then when he died and the kingdoms were split up, there was a little bit back and forth, but nobody came in there and totally destroyed Israel. And they didn't, they might have occupied them. Even the Romans came in and they occupied, but they didn't destroy it like this is going to, just massive wholesale genocide. It just not, you haven't seen that on this scale, that it's going to happen in this final war. But there's lots and lots of prophecies about this against the Israelites, and Deuteronomy 31, Psalms 2, Isaiah 14, Isaiah 26, Isaiah 29, Jeremiah 4 and 6 and 30, and Joel 2. And actually Joel 3 too, Zephaniah 1 and 3, and Zechariah 12 and 14. So all of those, lots of those prophecies talk about a nation coming in and attacking Israel in the latter days, or in the last days. Okay, so in that day when God comes against the land of Israel, it is a declaration of Adonai. My fury will rise up in my nostrils, in my jealousy and the fire of my wrath. I have spoken. Surely in that day there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Okay, so God is coming. He sees, even though he set all this in motion, it's going to be for, they're going to cause a lot of pain and suffering for Israel, but he set it in motion for a reason, and that's for the Geulah, the redemption of Israel that will be coming. And but when he sees all of this, it still makes him mad that somebody is attacking his chosen people, and so he said he's going to send a great earthquake in the land that would express his anger. So that tells me that these people, the people from the north, have come in. They have occupied a major portion of Israel, but this earthquake is going to come in and really cause havoc to these guys, to the enemies of Israel. And so God basically said, okay, I'm gonna explode. And the earthquake will have global implications. All of nature is going to be touched. Enemy defenses will crumble, and enemy forces, they're going to turn on each other, and you'll see all of that. In fact, I think I need to go ahead and read that verse. I didn't read the verse, did I? The fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep upon the ground, and all humans upon the face of the earth will shake at my presence. The mountains will be thrown down, the steep places will fall, every wall will fall to the ground. I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains. It is a declaration of Adonai. Every man's sword will be against his brother. So this earthquake is going to be something else. It's really going to be strong. And you say, well, how can an earthquake over there have worldwide implications? Well, it can have an effect of certainly throughout throughout the Mediterranean, and animals can feel those kind of things coming on, and this earthquake, and especially when he's talking about other things that's going to be happening, the enemy defenses will crumble. And remember, Israel is a major, they will probably by that time be a major exporter of natural gas from the Leviathan and the Tamar fields that are offshore of Israel in the Mediterranean. A major earthquake like that can interrupt pipelines and refineries, and not so much refineries with the case of natural gas, but certainly with the stations where they process the gas and move it on through the pipelines. And so they can have a big effect. And one of the things that's going to happen here is that the allies of Gog are going to start turning on each other. And the defenses that they put up, somehow God is going to turn that. And he did it in ancient armies too, where armies would get confused and they'd go ahead and kill each other. And so that Israel did not have to fight them. And this is going to be something, the same kind of thing that's going to happen. They're going to turn on each other. And it looks like that perhaps that Gog will not be defeated directly by God, that Adonai is going to come through with fire and brimstone, although he's going to do that. But that's not going to what does away with Gog. It's his own allies turning on him and defeating and destroying each other. That's what's going to destroy his assault on Israel. So it says, I will punish him with pestilence and blood. I will pour out rain on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples with him, a torrential rain with hailstones, fire and brimstone. So I will magnify and sanctify myself. I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations, and they will know that I am Adonai. So the Lord said he's going to, there's going to be some supernatural events, hailstones. And, you don't think hailstones can devastate an army. If you're out in the open fields and, hailstones come hurtling down, just a 5-pound hailstone. And I say 5 pound, that's not terribly big. In the tribulation, they talk about 100-pound hailstones. Well, those things start coming down on you. You have no shelter. It can maim and certainly can kill you. And then the pestilence, basically plague and sickness and things like that. And just the bloodshed. And it says it's going to pour out, torrential rains that, again, torrential rains can cause an army to just completely bog down. Even modern armies They're no different than the ancient armies that with their chariots. Well, our chariots, they may be a little bit better, but torrential rains can bog things down to where they can't move. And so then coming in with hailstones and fire and brimstone could possibly be something like volcanoes, where they're erupting and pouring the volcanic ash and so forth onto the enemy. And remember now that a lot of Israel's land, their just the land that they grow in, is old volcanic land. I mean, it's so rich in minerals, and all they needed was water to make it produce. And so, and anyway, at the end of all of this, the people of the world will know that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one that is coming in, and he is rescuing Israel. And then at that point, Israel is going to know that it was God that was rescuing them. It was in fact, they're going to know that it's Yeshua, the Son of God, and they'll look on him who they pierced. And that's when Israel is going to say that Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so at that point, that we'll see the redemption, the salvation of Israel on a physical level, certainly from the war, and then also on a spiritual level as they recognize that it was Yeshua that rescued them. So, all right, I finished up tonight about 10 minutes early. Are there any comments or questions that anyone might have on this lesson? We're going to go ahead and finish off 39 in, it'll be 3 weeks from tonight.
Well, you did make one statement. You said, we're going to see all of this. And I'm like, I hope I don't. I hope I'm gone.
Well, maybe you are. I don't know. Are you one of those rapture folks?
Well, I mean, I just hope I die before it.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know when this is going to happen. I really am sure.
I know that. None of us do.
It could be. It could start, within just the matter of a few years, and it could, because I do believe that we will have to have a third temple, because the Revelation talks about how there will be an abomination of desolation, where the temple will be defiled, and so they're already getting stuff ready to go for the new temple, and it's just going to be a case of, okay, once they figure out where they're going to put the temple, and it does not have to be on the Temple Mount. Okay, it just doesn't have to be there. It could very well be just off the Temple Mount, and they could do that quite handily. All right, so that was, it could happen in our lifetime. And you know me, I don't teach a pre-tribulation rapture. I don't teach a rapture at all. I just teach that at the end of the tribulation time, those the believers will be caught up in the air, and that their bodies change. The dead the dead in Christ will rise first, and then all those of us that are still alive will go up in the air, meet him. Our bodies will be changed, and then we'll come back down to earth to begin the final stages of the end time battle, Armageddon, whatever you want to call it, and the beginning of the millennial reign.